Welcome to Photoactive, a podcast about photography in the Apple ecosystem. I'm Kirk McElhearn.
And I'm Jeff Carlson.
This episode is brought to you by the Photographer's Ephemeris, the app that lets you plan your photography according to the sun and moon. We'll tell you more about the Photographer's Ephemeris later in the show. This week, we're happy to welcome Katrin Eismann, photographer, author, and much more. Katrin, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Katrin, I've known you for years. I think we've only met in person once or twice, such is the way on the internet. And what's great is we've been able to follow you, your books, your photography, Instagram especially. There was some things that caught our eye that said, oh, we should have Katrin on. So how did you get into photography? We don't have to go too deep into this, but I'm always curious, like what caught people on this path?
Right. Well, I was lucky. My parents really loved art, and when I was young, every other weekend we'd either go to a museum or out to nature. And so we were surrounded with art books, art, museums. And so when I was like 5, I took the crystal stopper off their cognac bottle and I ran around the house photographing through the Photoshop facet filter, which of course had never been invented yet. Then when I went to college for the first time, I studied philosophy and politics. And realized that I don't like sitting, reading, and writing, that I want to do something. I want to, be outside, be active. And someone lent me their camera, and I didn't know how to turn it on. I had no idea what I was doing. But I followed this bunny rabbit around a field. And in my mind, it was like a National Geographic cover. But I loved it. I loved being out in the world, interacting, walking, looking. I thought I can change the world with my photographs. I've sobered up from that realization. And it just really lets me explore the world and see the world more clearly.
Do you live in New York? A lot of your photographs seem to be taken in Manhattan or around Manhattan.
Right. I live on the Hudson River, right across from Manhattan. And we're lucky enough also to have a home up in Michigan on Lake Huron. So that's when you see a lot of water. It's either Hudson River or Lake Huron.
That's two real opposites.
Yes, I don't want to go swimming in the Hudson River.
No, I wasn't thinking that. I was thinking more the landscapes in New York and Wisconsin by a river are extremely different. Sort of yin-yang settings to take photographs.
Well, and what's beautiful about it is, up in Michigan, you have that endless horizon, which really lets your mind sort of go and be free. New York City, there's the urban horizon, which with the light and the weather, the clouds is also constantly changing. And
did you grow up in New York? Is that where you were going to visit museums and getting out? And
I grew up as in a very good suburb about 20 miles from New York. And we could do whatever we wanted as long as we were home in time for dinner.
I remember those days. And when I had a child, everything was different. People started worrying. And now parents have to make play dates for their kids. It's like we would just go out and we'd play. And as you say, as long as you're home for dinner.
I know. It's amazing that we survived.
And I didn't even have a helmet when I rode my bicycle. Or when I went down that steep hill on a skateboard. Didn't have knee pads and elbow pads. So, Katrin, you started shooting film, obviously, like anyone who shot film back in the day. When did you make the switch to digital?
Well, as I mentioned, I went to college once and I was asked to leave, meaning like you're not being college. So I went back to college when I was 30 and I was a 30-year-old freshman, and I went to Rochester Institute of Technology. And in my second year there, very early, 1989, one professor understood digital and electronic. They called it electronic still imaging back then. And I literally followed Professor Douglas Ford Ray down the hall, because what I had been doing in the dark room, compositing, creating effects, his students were doing in the comfort of a chair on a beta version of Photoshop. So we started with a version like 0.89, no manuals, no user groups, nothing. I think it had levels and brightness contrast. And so that was fortuitous that he was forward thinking and that I picked up on it, that I'm at college. I wasn't going to get a third chance, so I better look into the future. So yes, I started with film, and I obviously don't shoot film anymore. I respect it, but for me, the advantages of digital as a photographer, an artist, and as a teacher, make complete sense. So I started in 89, with cameras that were stupidly expensive and terribly bad.
And very low resolution. They were like, it would be the size of a postage stamp today if you look at the resolution.
Oh yeah, 640 by 480 was like we were winning. The Sony Mavica was $10,000 and recorded on 2.25 floppy disks. You could kill a cow with it, but you had to be open. And back then, people that were sort of doing the poo la la la, weren't really getting it because photography is based on technology, and the changes in technology influence the aesthetic and the practice of photography. And so I spent a lot of years sort of making excuses going, this is going to get better. And, I was right. So, it's been very exciting. I'm glad I started back then when it was literally just levels and brightness contrast, because right now Photoshop is, it's a 10-ton gorilla. I'm glad I don't have to start with it now.
But it's interesting that you got into digital photography in Rochester, of all places, the home of Kodak.
Well, I also worked with Kodak. I helped them roll out their first full-frame 35mm camera that wasn't tethered, that was portable. And I actually went to meetings at Kodak and State Street. You imagine a big boardroom table, and one side were the film people, and the other side were the digital people.
Oh, boy.
And they would, they would fight. The film people, we're paying for you. The digital people, we're the future. And they go back and forth, and then they'd look at me. What do you think? So I was like, well, it's great. You offer both.
Yeah. It must have been fascinating, though, to be involved in that period where, there is such a shift in the technology. And arguably, Kodak tried to sort of pretend it wasn't happening for a long time, hoping that it would just be a passing fancy. But now we see that, poor old Kodak.
Well, I mean, and the Kodak engineers back then and the patents they have, and they created the first digital camera in 1976. That's what I loved about working with these people. They were incredibly smart and dedicated. I mean, they really cared about what they were doing. I mean, okay, you take a company like that, it's the huge freighter. It's not going to turn on a dime. And so you see that, in digital, how the smaller companies came up. They still have so many patents and all this technology and color that it's pretty amazing. I think a lot of people learned by watching Kodak because no company wants to be Kodak. Have that experience.
Yeah. Was this something that at the time you had like a lightning bolt moment that said, wow, this is definitely the future? Or was it this is a very interesting thing that they're dabbling with? Because early digital, like everything was really against it. It's this little side project. I
think that when I first started, an Apple FX2 was a great machine. There's $12,000.
Oh, yeah.
Upgrade with 8 mega RAM. The Kodak printer was $25,000. The camera was $25,000. So, that lightning bolt hit my bank account. No, but I was lucky that.
And those are prices you're quoting 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when that was real money.
Exactly. So the Kodak 460 was really a lightning bolt because it was good quality, and it was transportable and interchangeable lenses because it was based on I think a Nikon F3. And so, being able to actually walk around, get the quality, 6 megapixels, excuse me, that was pretty interesting. But I have to admit, I made mistakes too. I worked at the Kodak Center for Creative Imaging in Camden, Maine, and the Kodak's first camera was made for the military and the press. So it was a Nikon that was tethered to a 12-pound hard drive. How's that for portable? And it could hold 156 images. I'd be walking, shooting with it, and people would go, is that your heart monitor? And I'd be like, I always have my heart monitor attached to my Nikon. But Apple came up, and they brought one of their first Apple Quick Takes 100s.
Oh, yeah.
It looked like a plastic hamburger.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And in it could hold 8 images. And I was like, oh, poo-poo. I can hold 156. Man. I was wrong. And in a way, me making that mistake has taught me not to poo-poo things like that. Because obviously we know where Apple is and who sold more cameras.
And we know where digital photography is.
Yeah.
You probably saw that Wim Wenders made some comments recently about how there's too many photographs and photography is dead and all that. But when you think about this, back in the film days, most families had some sort of a camera to take snapshots. Obviously, people take more now, but there are so many more possibilities for photography. You just look at the people on Instagram, and I'm not talking about the people taking selfies. I'm talking about the actual photographers. There's millions of them. And it really has taken what was a confidential art form. When I started, I did a Photoshop in the 70s in high school. And, back then photography was, it's an arty thing other than your vacation snapshots. But now photography is a whole world. It's expanded so greatly since then.
Well, people are understanding, we as intellectuals would say people are visually literate. And it's what are you talking about? No, what I'm talking about is people are communicating with images. I work with young people. I mean, you look at Snapchat, you look at WeChat, you look at Instagram. It's all about images and how quickly we can read them. I mean, I can't remember the last time I went to a web page and there was no picture. And if I did find one, I would be like, I'm out of here. Because it was probably an insurance company. But right. We use pictures much more, and we see more, and we understand them very, very well. Our brains are very good at that. So I think it's great. When I see people taking pictures, I'm like, more power to you. What I am concerned about is that people are taking the picture to prove that they've experienced something. And you see that in museums, you see it at tourist sites, you see that at shows. That it's they're leading their life for Instagram. And that's sort of sometimes it's just good to put down the camera for, 15 seconds and look at what's happening around you. And I have been known to make that mistake too. I want to look at my phone, I want to check Instagram, I'm walking down the street. I know I'm going to bump into something, and that's really stupid. But I'm probably missing a shot because I'm not looking around. So you've got to find a balance.
I have actually never taken a selfie, ever. A friend of mine once took a selfie of him and me, but I have never taken a selfie. And I walk around, I live just outside of Stratford-upon-Avon, which is a very touristy town, and I see the people who are constantly taking selfies, who are constantly trying to photograph all the old buildings. And as you say, they go there to get the photographs to put them in their Instagram feed or on Facebook or whatever, but they don't experience where they are. I remember I was at Stonehenge last year, and a group of tourists were all walking around, and they were just, jabbering and taking pictures, and they weren't looking at this edifice, which is, prehistoric and which is a rarity. But is it that much different than back in the film days when people had their Instamatic or their SX70? And I guess it is a little bit because it cost money to take pictures back then.
It's very different because back when you photograph film, how we share the images has changed completely. Mm-hmm. And you see it when someone takes a picture of a young child. The child immediately runs up and wants to look at it. Or you're sure to show the phone. Because back then, 20 years ago, you'd have your point and shoot, your Instamatic, and then you'd drop the film off and you'd go pick it up a week later. And then you'd get together and pass around the prints. So that was it was communal. There was some time in between. So it's sort of become the reality. You're at Stonehenge, but look at my picture. That's it's actually fascinating.
I remember that I took a bunch of pictures of people taking selfies in front of Stonehenge, and it was really interesting to see their faces and their reactions. And if it hadn't been so windy, which it always is at Stonehenge, I would have stood around and taken more pictures like that, because the way people interact in front of a monument is really fascinating. We're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsor, and we'll be right back. When you're shooting landscape photography, it's all about the light. You want to be in the right place when the sun is in the right position. The Photographer's Ephemeris is an app that helps you plan outdoor photography in natural light. You can see how the light will fall on the land, day or night, at your current location or at any location on the planet. The Photographer's Ephemeris 3D gives you a 3D model of the terrain. It shows you exactly how the sun, moon, stars, and Milky Way are positioned relative to mountaintops and valley floors where you're shooting. You can interact with a rich simulation of sunlight, moonlight, and starlight set against the actual topography of your shooting location. Plan your photo shots in advance and save up to 33% when you buy the Photo Planning Tools bundle on the App Store. This contains the Photographer's Ephemeris, the Photographer's Ephemeris 3D, and the Photographer's Transit, a map-based field of view planning app. The Photographer's Ephemeris and its related apps help you take the best photos at the right times. It is also available for Android, and there's even a web version. Visit photoephemeris.com. That's photoephemeris in one word.com, or use the link in the show notes. So you were saying something that was interesting, that you take a picture of a kid and they want to see the picture. When I take pictures, when I go around with my camera, I very rarely look at my pictures when I take them. And I guess this is because I did start back in the days of film. The only time I'll check is if I'm really trying to get something in focus just right, or I really need to check the exposure, but more often I'll bracket exposure. I'll do 3 shots with different exposure compensation. But I have no desire to look at the pictures right away. I like that kind of surprise when I download the photos to my computer and I get to discover if they're successful.
Well, I understand that there's a variety of ways. It depends, I think, how you're working and what you're doing. What I prefer my students not do is that adage of chimping. You're looking at the camera going, because once again, you're missing the moment around you. And so I think that, when you're out working and you're trying things, you're learning while you're shooting. And by looking at the photo, you could see this is working, this isn't, I need to push this further, I should use a different lens. Those are different approaches. Personally, I shoot mirrorless. I'm a Sony artisan. Mm-hmm. So because the quality of that electronic viewfinder, my eye is on that viewfinder so much more. So I can see the photo instantly. I know what I'm getting, and it's helping me get to the better picture faster. So looking at the LCD screen, which is just irritating. Also, for us more mature types that need glasses, I cannot see the LCD screen without my glasses on. But I can't photograph with my glasses on.
Exactly. And that little diopter correction on the viewfinder is the best thing on a camera. And there's another thing for me with the LCD. I have a bit of a tremor. So if I'm holding a camera out and looking at the LCD, it's not as stable as when the camera is leaning against my face.
Mm-hmm. And so, where was I going with that? So that constant on, off, and then putting your glasses in your mouth, and it's New York City, that's just disgusting. So, what's also interesting now is how people are instantly sharing. Not just even shoot an Instagram, because that could take up to 10 seconds, but the Instagram stories and the Facebook stories. So you're like, you're right, you could be right there. And people love that too.
Is that how that works? See, I've never used those, and whenever I see them on Instagram or Facebook, I just ignore them. I don't look at them.
Oh, no, they're just there to make you more jealous.
I know, but is the idea that your camera is actually tethered to Instagram, so you shoot and it immediately goes there?
No, you can hit your profile button and you can choose to do a live video.
Oh, okay.
And so it's sort of what's going on at that moment, or a photo, and then type on it and things like that.
So you can show people your dessert as you're eating it.
Yeah. So you can share in 3 seconds instead of 10 seconds.
But then I could do live cat videos. That would be cool, actually.
You absolutely could, and that's actually probably like your path to success right there.
We were commenting that there are no cats in your photos on your Instagram pictures, and then Jeff said that they're probably all in the shadows.
Yes. Anyway, I love cats. I love dogs, but the no cats in Michigan because I'm scared they're just going to decimate the wildlife that I encourage to be in my garden. And I'm not going to have just a house cat, and I declawing is animal cruelty. So, and a dog, in all honesty, you can edit this out. I don't want to follow something around for 15 years cleaning up its poop.
Yes.
I totally agree.
And I love them all, but...
Yeah, I love dogs and cats. Unfortunately, I realized when I went to college that I could breathe when I'm away from dogs and cats. And that's when I discovered that I was allergic. I want to bring up something that you had mentioned, visual literacy, and when we were talking about people taking shots, one thing that I think that is interesting is when I had a little point and shoot camera when I was young and we would go someplace, I would take pictures, but it would totally be with the idea of look where I am. But now I think people go and they do that to say, look, I'm here, but because they've seen examples on Instagram, or they've gone to a place because they've seen it on Instagram or elsewhere, there's more of a visual literacy of, well, what makes a better shot here? Even if they're just, saying, here I am, there seems to be just by, I don't know, osmosis or just the preponderance of millions of images, people are taking better photos in that sense. But are they?
So people are seeing a lot more photos. And if you look at a lot of photos, that's like a great step of getting better. Okay? But, has to be a but, you photograph the things that you recognize. That's why every blank picture of the Slot Canyon and that horseshoe can look the same. Has anyone ever seen a bad picture of the Slot Canyons?
I have a couple, but not that I've shared.
People that you're recording where you are, you recognize, oh, this is Slot Canyon, or this is that horseshoe bend. This is the Yosemite landmarks. You photograph it because you recognize it. That's how we're functioning. What photographers are going to do is, of course, we're going to record I was here, but then they're going to interpret, why am I here? Why am I taking the picture? How do I see it? And it's that next step of interpretation. Get away from the checklist. Because there is a checklist now in Instagram world of about 400 locations that you should go to.
And they're being overrun by tourists who want to take pictures. And I hate to say it, a number of them are falling off cliffs.
Or fall off cliffs.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's a real shame because there's areas they're going to have to actually control how many people go in because it is getting ruined. So I always push my students, of course you establish the scene, but then how do you interpret it? And that's point of view, framing, depth of field, etc. What time of day are you shooting? Things like that. And that's what takes work. We don't need, another picture of name it.
I've been in the UK for about 5 years, and I went to Stonehenge twice, and I've taken pictures. And both times I was there, I was like, okay, this is a fascinating place, but what can I do to take a picture of this that will be any different from what someone else has done? So what I tried to do was get close-ups. I mean, I took some shots of the whole henge, the circle of stones, but I tried to get close-ups of different things. But nevertheless, it's like you can't take pictures of that unless you are in a privileged situation that there's no one there. Or I don't know if you know Michael Kenna's photo that he took of Stonehenge, long exposure at night, that sort of thing. That you have to be alone to be able to do that. But otherwise, it's almost pointless to take pictures of monuments like that.
Well, I have to admit, lots of times when I go to beautiful places or museums, I look at the postcards first. I'm like, it's great. They did a great job.
and then they'll do it better than you and more quickly.
And it totally frees me up.
You don't need to lug all your gear.
Yeah. Well, it frees me up. Now, I can, concentrate on my pictures.
Sometimes we also recommend, go and get that shot out of the way. Get the shot that everybody does so you have it and it's not occupying your brain. And then you can start looking for different angles and different approaches and all of that.
And photography needs you to warm up. You always start shooting where you left off, which is why I photograph every single day. And those first couple shots, you could sort of go, these aren't any good, but it's sort of like stretching before a run. Just get back into it, get familiar with the camera again, make sure you don't have your nighttime setting when it's daytime.
High ISO. I've done that so many times. It's sad. Earlier, you mentioned that you had been doing compositing before you even got to digital and into Photoshop. And so this brings us into the Photoshop work and post-processing that you do and that you teach. Did you start compositing because you just didn't want to take a picture of whatever was right there? Or what drew you to that, and how did that lead into Photoshop and that whole post-processing realm?
Well, the beauty of compositing, of course, and if you look at the history of photography, it can be done in camera, in the darkroom, etc. I always had a problem trying to say something in 1/125th of a second. I'm not a photojournalist, and it just felt like a really short period of time. And so the things that I was exploring and wanted to express, the idea of being multi-layered, multi-dimensional appealed to me. And also, when you're doing it in the darkroom or with film, the concept of serendipity came in a lot, which I loved, with those surprises of, I hadn't thought of that. And what you think is a mistake. But back in film, there was no undo. So you're like, okay, where am I going to go with this? And so I just like that depth. I also like the how it slowed me down. Instead of being an image hunter, I was an image creator. And so that just always appealed to me.
So as you're shooting now, are you thinking of what is in front of you primarily, or do you have the idea of, okay, I know how this is going to look after I work with it some more in Photoshop?
I literally see Lightroom in my viewfinder. I mean, I can look outside and go, man, gradient with clarity and dehaze is going to make those clouds pop. And because that's my métier, that's my world. And so I completely think about processing when I'm shooting. And when I used to do a lot of compositing, people could get very uneasy because I'd be like, I'm going to take your head and I'm going to put it on this building. And you could see people like, ah, but it's just that the imagination. And anybody that uses the software a lot, that's what you shoot for. It's part of your language.
It's interesting because I'm very uninterested in post-processing. I use Apple Photos. I'll adjust exposure, contrast, brightness. I'll do a little bit of this and that. I'll make black and white conversions. But I don't even want to learn about all these advanced things because in some ways I feel that, and I totally respect people who do what you do, but in some ways for me, photography is not that. It's more taking a picture of what's there and tweaking it a little bit to get what you want. I'm more like the William Eggleston who takes pictures of things and doesn't plan necessarily what's going to happen than, someone who's going to be I want to spend more time taking pictures and not in front of the computer, basically.
Well, I understand that. That's why I don't do compositing anymore.
Okay.
Because I want to be out in the real world. And so, I shoot in the studio also. So the advantages is I've become a better photographer, so there's a lot less time in Photoshop.
Right.
We don't want to fix things. And so it's a balance. And now with Lightroom, it's, so much easier and faster that I can really balance both.
And plus today's cameras are so much better that you're saving time on the back end because of what you can do on the front end.
Absolutely. No arguments for me on that.
This also points to having different visions. I mean, Kirk is not interested in doing post-processing because he sees more of the moment and capturing that moment, whereas somebody who does a lot of post-processing or knows Photoshop or Lightroom really well, their image of what the photo is extends all the way through that. And so I can totally see someone like their vision is, I want a dark, moody, dark roiling clouds. And maybe you get some of that on the day, but definitely knowing where to push that brings that vision forth, which I think is what you're really trying to focus on is, like what do you have to say versus, what this scene is that everybody else has seen.
Right, which this summer I completed a fairly large body of work called The Futility of Memory.
Oh yeah.
And that was made up in along Lake Huron, and all the pictures started with the camera on a tripod with a neutral density filter because I needed the long exposure. Mm-hmm. And people ask me, "Oh, do you do that in Photoshop?" And I'm thinking, "Oh Lord." And what those long exposures did is they put the serendipity back in. The way the light came off the lake, the way the waves, the movement was rendered, the way I was rendered in the water. I mean, that was really beautiful. But on that note, I could look at the screen while I was shooting, and then I knew already what I was going to be doing in Lightroom, to increase the contrast, the vibrancy, the clarity, etc. Because we all know the raw file is a relatively flat object. Mm-hmm. So that's not how our eyes see. But if I can capture it, I know where I can take it. And so the post-processing is very important for me. But, camera, tripod, long exposure, I am not doing that in Photoshop.
We will put a link to some of these images in the show notes. They're splendid because they do look processed, but they don't look processed. They don't look like you started with something basic and then just went crazy with it. It does seem like this is an optical result that has, some boosted saturation or, some vignetting or something. And that's what really draws.
And they don't look like typical long exposures where the water looks like whipped cream.
Right. Mm-hmm. Exactly. My favorite exposure was 1.6 seconds.
Oh, that's interesting.
After a whole summer, I'm like, gotta get to 1.6 seconds.
That's interesting. And you can see in the photos where you have people who are moving and there's just enough movement to show the movement, but the water still has the character of water and it doesn't look like marble or something strange. That is an interesting length of time to do an exposure, because most people do think of long exposures for, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Got to make that waterfall look like it's not water.
Got to make sure it's gone. You can't even see it.
Well, on that project, I only had about 15 minutes a day that I could shoot, because everything's shot at sunrise.
Okay.
So I'm on the lake. I'm out before sunrise. I set up, in the house, and then in the morning walk out. And then that sun, even on a cloudy day, would usually break through on the horizon. And I had about 15 minutes where the light was gold. And as soon as it went to silver, I'm like, back to bed.
So that's interesting, because the lighting does give all of these photos a certain character. And knowing that they were all shot about the same time of day, or at least the same sun time of day,
right,
explains how you get that character and that color and that tone and those shadows that are very particular to that time of day as well.
And that was part of the palette. So, so I have maybe 45 total images. I don't want to know how many outtakes I have, because when you shoot like that, it's like it's just bad. My camera, it got wet, it got glitter, it got sand, it's fine.
But you had to get up early for a long time. Maybe your next project should be done at noon. That way you don't have to get up early.
Oh. Well, I'm trying to figure my next project out on the lake in the wintertime, because the light is blue. Now I've announced it. Now I'm going to have to do it.
But twilight in the clouds is nice in winter. I lived in the French Alps for a dozen years, and it's true that at that time of year, you get some wonderful light.
Yeah, but it will not be wet or naked.
So a quick question with this project. Did you have these results in mind when you started, or did the start of the project be, I'm going to do some long exposures in the morning and just see what happens, and then it turned into a project? Or did you have I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to have this batch of photos at this time with this look?
Well, I took a long exposure workshop with a fellow Sony artisan, Theobald, I don't know his name. Mm-hmm. And what he really did was sort of bring down the intimidation factor of long exposure photography. So, of course, I went and I got the filter. And now I'm on the lake and I'm like, okay, I'm going to shoot, the water. And it was glistening and beautiful. I'm like, well, that's great. Can't do that 40 times, right? But the technical and the results inspired me. So I'm like, well, what else can I do? Because it's like, you see people photographing the actual sunset. I'm like, no, turn around. Mm-hmm. And so that sort of triggered, what could I do? And, I had some of those objects in the house, the vases and things. I'm like, well, let's sort of see. So I started doing the still lives in the lake. And after a couple shots, I was like, this is it. I got it. And so I would spend the morning, the 15, 20 minutes shooting. I'd go in, do the editing, and then in the afternoon drive around to all the thrift stores, all the Salvation Armies, and buy props. Because after a while, I knew what was going to look good with the water. I have got a good collection of, old crystal vases and bowls and things of different colors. And then I always wanted to work with that idea of things that are completely ridiculous. Like there's a picture of me ironing the lake.
I'm actually just looking at that one thinking, I hope it's not plugged in.
I'm not getting back to the Salvation Army because I don't want to kill anybody.
And there's also one where there's a saw and you're sawing the light that's reflecting off the lake. And that's particularly nice because you have the long exposure of the drops of water that are coming off the teeth of the saw that create these really nice striations in the image.
Because I learned that if I put the object in the water and pull up, I'll get that. And so that's the thing. With digital photography, it's so great. You take the picture, you look at it, hopefully you get better, right? Because it's teaching you what's working. And that's what I was doing. I dragged a lot of stuff in that lake. The neighbors were very nice. They would close their curtains because I was always out there in some negligee. But it was, and I feel like I'm done with it. I've got 45 images. I've got to move on to the next thing because it's like, how much more can I drag down into the lake? But so it was a good summer.
Let me also say I'm glad that this wasn't the Hudson, because at first I thought maybe that's where you were shooting. I was like, oh no, now I'm concerned about her health. Yeah,
the Hudson's gotten a lot better in the last 30 years. With Riverkeeper and there's a lot of water sports, kayaking, waterboarding. It's gotten a lot better. But when you have those warning signs, like if you're young or pregnant, don't eat the fish. I'm like, I'm neither. and I'm not eating it. So the Hudson's got a lot better because like 30 years ago, it was literally just a sewer.
So thank you very much for this, Katrin. This is wonderful work that you have here. And it's really interesting to hear how you've made the link between the early film days and what you're doing now. It's interesting to see the progress. And, you know, as you said earlier, a lot of people still do shoot film, and it's not quite the same. You've taken ideas and experience from film and you've put it into digital. And rather than having this sort of nostalgic atmosphere for film because it looks cool, you're creating things that build on an experience of using the different technologies. And it's really wonderful. I really love this work, and particularly the lake pictures. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So it's time for our snapshots. Jeff, what have you got this week?
So I'm starting with a book today. I will admit I have not completely read this book, but I find it fascinating. It is called A Photojournalist's Field Guide. It's by Stacy Pearsall, and she's a combat photographer. And this is a book that talks about her experiences as a combat photographer, but it's also very much a how to do combat photography, which I would think would have a very limited audience. But there are all sorts of lessons you can learn from, you know, having a small portable kit of gear and dealing with uncomfortable situations. And it's a fascinating look into another realm of photography that I can guarantee you I'm never going to do, but it's interesting to see that world and see how it differs, because that's also photography.
Yeah, I wouldn't do anything like that too, but it certainly does sound quite interesting. Did Robert Capa ever write any books about his experiences during the war? Or I think maybe there was a documentary. It's worth looking up. If we find something, we'll put links in the show notes. Robert Capa is one of the founders of the Magnum Photo Agency, and he's very well known for the photos he took during World War II.
And Kirk, how about you this week? Do you have a book?
I have a book, yes. This is interesting how I discovered this book. On Instagram, I follow photographers, and then I look to see who they're following, and I follow some of these curating accounts, and I look, and when I see a nice photo, I follow the photographer. In this case, I think it was a gallery in London who showed some photos, and I followed this photographer. His name is Paul Hart. The book I have is called Farmed, and it's some fascinating stuff. These are black and white photos of farms in England. There are gray skies, and there are sinuous roads, and there are subtle lines, and there are trees and fields and all that. And you probably know that I live next to a farm and there's wheat fields around me. I've mentioned that. And I find this a really interesting type of photography, in particular because it's black and white landscape photography. Most landscape photography is color, but this is black and white, very rich, subtle shades of gray. Most of the photos are square, but a number of the photos are in a 2-to-1 aspect ratio. Now, I posted something in the Facebook group saying that, you know, I've mentioned on the show that I'm an aspect ratio fundamentalist. But when I saw this, I thought, that's really interesting. 2-to-1, a double square. So I took a number of photos that I'd shot recently of fields and I cropped them. And what it does is it's like a panoramic photo of a field. Instead of having all the sky and all the field, you're focusing on the middle. So these are beautiful photos in the book, and it's influenced me a lot in thinking of a different type of aspect ratio. We'll put a link in the show notes. This is a reprint of a book he published a few years ago, and he just has another new book out called Drained. And I bought the two books, signed editions, that I got directly from the photographer. And there's some fascinating photography in here. So it's Paul Hart. The book is called Farmed, and link in the show notes. Thanks for listening to Photoactive. You can find show notes, including any photos we discuss in the show, at photoactive.co. That's photoactive.co. We couldn't afford the M. You can subscribe to Photoactive in your favorite podcast app or in Apple Podcasts. See the links on our website. And think about leaving us a rating or review on iTunes or in your podcast app. I'd like to remind you to check out the Photographer's Ephemeris. Follow the link in the show notes. Until next week, thanks again for listening.